Let's get going. Let's rock and roll. All right, everybody. Thank you. It's great to have everybody. It's Event Marketing Redefined. I'm your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. And today I have Rich Vallaster on. He is the Director of Marketing, Industry Relations, and Event Experiences for Personify Corp. And Rich has no pun intended, he has a rich background in events on kind of both sides of things, exhibitor, association, the whole gamut. So Rich, welcome. Thanks for coming on my show.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You got it, man. So first things first, just so people know, give people just a quick, brief background on you, right? And as well as what you're doing at Personify.
Cool. Yeah, I spent the bulk of my career in events. I actually started in large scale outdoor events with the general public. So by the time I got the trade shows, man, not being spit on, sued, accosted, whatever with the general public, like trade shows seem like child's play. They are not, but that's where I got started. And really my passion is events, help start trade shows, market trade shows, ultimately ended up in tech for trade shows. And that sort of led to this spot where, the bulk of my day, working with trade shows and associations and really trying to provide, thought leadership into the space, because I think times have changed. We all went through a crazy time. In my spare time, I teach in the CEM program from IAEE. I got to write a forward for a book recently. I just love trying to give event professionals, new and old, new ideas and really get them thinking. My job is always to challenge people to go, I got to think differently. So that's really why I'm excited to be with your audience today.
Awesome, man. That's great. So let's talk about the kind of current state of events, right? I've been talking about it a lot on LinkedIn. I certainly have my perspective on some things. What is the current state of events, trade shows, events, kind of concerns for exhibitors, associations? What's going on?
I've sort of joked, but I feel like 2022 is in somewhat the party, right? There was this pent up demand. We had all gone through various versions of COVID. It was like a bad Netflix series. There was just one more season. We thought like, hey, we've dealt with each of these and there's another season. And so now I am definitely concerned that 2023, let's not make that the hangover. Good parties often lead to hangovers. And we just are going to have to think about hey, maybe we did exceed our pre-pandemic numbers last year, but will we this year? I look at the latest, I serve on the Center for Exhibition Industry Research, and we've got some new data. We're always trying to, serve up data. And Q4 of 2022, which is the latest CEIR index that we have, about quarter of the shows had the same or higher of pandemic attendance. That's pretty amazing to think about. But will that continue? We're seeing in the, about 20% down for most shows for attendance, 20% down for about overall revenue. Net square feet is a little closer to only about 16 to 17% down. So we're seeing that as sort of a lumpy return, an uneven return. But again, there's a lot of shows that felt like, holy smokes, we're back. And my concern is when you drag out that 2019 playbook, because if you look at most show floors, if I were to blindfold folks, it'll look like 2019 for some shows. And I'm concerned that it's not the same audience, things are different. So those are probably my biggest concerns right now.
What's funny is you and I were talking about this just before we got on here, was we just exhibited. My company just exhibited at Exhibitor Live. And a lot of the sentiments that we've been getting from our customers who we help exhibit is attendance is lower, quality is good. If you execute the right way and you're at the right trade show, essentially you can go get results. Well, we felt that way exactly about Exhibitor. Attendance was lower. It was nowhere near what the show had been in years past. It just wasn't. But we also felt like we had a good show. We felt like we drew some quality leads.
And credit, I wasn't there, but I certainly follow on social media. And I think I looked at the way you engaged and people could, interact with different elements of your booth. You obviously did the podcast, but it is a more qualified buyer showing up. I think that sort of fluff audience of, we'll send lower level people or we'll send students or, whatever that. And there's nothing wrong with those attendees. Look, if you're an association, everybody's showing up as, another set of money or revenue coming in the door. But now you're saying, I think every organization realizes, I didn't say this in the intro, but, part of my role was when, we lost a longtime person who ran all of our events. We exhibit at 54 events a year, which is too many. I'm working on paring that down. But, you know, I suddenly started thinking about who do we send and who's the right person. And, you know, we've scaled that back. I mean, I think every CFO has been thrilled for a couple of years when they weren't seeing those plane tickets and those hotel rooms and things like that. And that's part of the events business is travel.
So you just kind of touched on there, A, obviously you have your background, but B, now you're saying that you're leading the events at Personify, who has an event marketing schedule. And one thing that you just said that hit me about change and about what's happening, because I think there's been big change from 19 to now. And I think a lot of people have just missed it. I think too many people in our industry just want things to go back to the way they were, and they just are not going. So like wake up and just know that they're not, right? And by my industry, I mean like exhibit houses, suppliers, tech companies, things like that. But you said reducing the number of events. This is something I'm hearing a lot. This is something that we're encouraging our customers to do. Look at the events, know your measurement, what's creating impact, what's not, and allocate your dollars to the proper places, and then go all in and do it the right way. So that's kind of what I hear you saying, or hopefully I didn't just tell a lie for you.
It is hard. I'm a trade show guy. You know, like it's hard for me to say, oh, maybe we shouldn't go to this event. You know,
you want to be there. Yeah. I know.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, I get that, you know, same feeling when, you know, I smell that fresh carpet on a trade show floor. You know, it's a high for me. But I'm also realizing that when I look at, and I would say this is a big thing that we're looking at too, is when you talk about, you know, what are we measuring on? And that's been a hard adjustment to say, like, hey, it was always leads. How many lead scans did we get? You know, how do we convert on those leads? And that's a shift to say leads are certainly important. You know, and when we did a big exhibitor survey, really trying to look at from 10 by 10 all the way up, you know, 800 square feet and beyond. And one of the things that stood out in the survey was that more people, closer to 70%, put visibility over leads, which was in the low 60s. And then brand fell right behind that. And that struck me too, is just much like us. Like there's that visibility component, hard to measure, but then there's the leads component. And so we're looking at more of like, you know, hey, are we quantifying how many meetings we had? Are we quantifying the ARR, you know, the average value of that client that maybe came to our booth and we had interaction? Those are all these like little storytelling pieces that we need to tie back to our data, because we may already have them in our leads database, but what was the interaction? How many meetings did we book? How many clients, you know, did we interact with and prospects? And that's, somebody messaged me the other day, was like, well, what are you evaluating? And I'm like, I'm still kind of coming up with that list, but we have to look at beyond leads.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting take there, which is people do, it's not, I mean, look, quantity of leads is more important than quality of leads. If quantity is more important, I would love to hear from somebody as to why, right? Maybe it's your organization. I mean, maybe there is something out there, but I would say 90% of the time, quality over quantity, right? The second thing, essentially what you said, is like visibility, brand awareness. How do you measure it, right? From what I'm seeing in my conversations is essentially it has to be with exit surveys. It has to be with an exit survey that is a very pointed, direct, straightforward question where you are trying to elicit a certain type of response, not like, how do you feel about the brand, right? You want to ask a direct question. What are you doing, Rich, how are you navigating your team and your events other than reducing the events? Is there anything in particular that you're doing for your events and trade shows?
Well, one, I think even the most seasoned sales person or sales staff needs to be re-educated and retrained on how to go to a trade show. We were talking in the green room before we got started today, is, you know, I met a bunch of event marketers last week. And what was ironic was, you know, some of these younger folks had graduated college in 2020 and have never been to an office and never been to a trade show, yet they're tasked with marketing an event. And so, you know, again, I think we assume when we go to a trade show, oh, our sales team, you know, John or Mary or Susie or whoever's been doing trade shows forever, it's re-educating them to say, hey, things are different. You're going to see more qualified buyers. You know, you don't have to hang out in the aisles to necessarily lead scan. They're going to probably come and have a far more valuable conversation. So let's be ready to do a demo. Let's be ready to have a deeper dive discussion versus let's scan them and send them on their way. I mean, just even teaching sales team how to disengage is important. So part of it is training our teams. And two, we're looking at our booth, let's stop thinking of it as an exhibit space. It sounds so transactional. And we're really talking about what is our booth journey? Like when someone comes up to our booth, how do we want them to, I mean, we make mistakes. I make mistakes. We went to ASAE annual. We did a great activation, but I think at the end of the day, we let people get to the activation too quickly. And what I've said to the team this year and across all of our events is at the end of that interaction with that prospect or, client, mostly prospect, do they know us and do we know them? Because to me, that's really important, because too many people walk away and go, who was that? What did they do? And then for us to go, who was that? What did they do? And that's the next level of where I want to take our engagements in that booth journey, is making sure that by the time they leave the booth, whether it's a 30-second, but a couple minute interaction, that we both walk away with that information. And that really takes intentionality.
I love training, qualifying, all the things you just touched on, training, qualifying, and then booth experience, right? The training is huge. I mean, you have to be on the same page on the trade show floor. I mean, I could tell you, me and my staff for Exhibitor Live, we had talking points, we had questions, we had conversation. We knew how to explain the theme. We knew how to tie things into our value proposition. We knew how to be conversational. We knew how not to be salesy. Those are all things we were discussing getting there. So that training that you're mentioning, I think, is a really important piece. The qualifying, I love that you said that, right? Like, you have to be able to qualify people and move on. I mean, you just do. You can't burn time. And then, the last piece about the journey is great, because essentially you should, as an event marketer going to a trade show or running an event or activation, you should be able to say to yourself, my ideal customer is going to walk into this space. What happens? What now? What does it look like? And if you don't know, you're in trouble.
Well, it's funny you say that. I am concerned as a lot of times we don't even know. I mean, I'm saying we, as in the industry or as exhibitors in general, sometimes don't know who that ideal customer is. And so we're not even understanding,
that's tough.
let alone the ideal one comes in. Who is the ideal one? And what are they going to be looking for us to solve in terms of challenges or software in our case? What are we going to solve? Because if we don't know who that person is, we're already starting the journey off wrong. Because I think that's the thing, is when we look at the journey, we start thinking about those personas and saying, well, maybe the journey in our booth could be very different based on, this person's interested in an association management system. Awesome. Well, your journey's here. Oh, you're interested in event management software. Your journey's here. And they're, again, thinking there's one journey, maybe oversimplifying it. So we have to think about those personas and knowing our customers and know how they're going to want to engage and what they're going to want. And that's sort of breaking down the concept piece by piece and rebuilding it. But I think it's really critical.
I mean, Rich, I would even take a step further with that, which that if you don't know, we'll say your ICP, your ideal client, profile, is how can you design your exhibit space? How can you do it? I mean, do you know how many exhibitors are walking around with trade show booths that they think just look nice? They're like, oh, this looks good. Oh, it's built well. Okay, great. Well, so you got to begin with the end in mind. It's just, there's a lot that can go wrong if you do not know your ICP. It's an absolute must in events, right?
Well, and I think it's where, you start to, it is hard because we tend to lean back on previous activations or booths that look pretty, or engagement for engagement's sake. Or I think from the marketing side, sometimes it's like creative for creative sake. If it ultimately doesn't deliver what we're trying to activate on or engage with our audience, we get caught up in cool. And sometimes that's where, like, okay, cool for cool's sake isn't what's going to work in a trade show in 2023 and beyond.
Agreed. Just a note for everybody here. Hey, if you have a question for myself or for Rich, fire it in the Q&A section. You can also put it in the chat. You have some talented, smart people in this audience that can help answer as well. Just as a note for everybody. Rich, tell me about some of the data that you guys have recently surveyed, uncovered from exhibitors primarily. What are some standouts you think people should know?
Well, I am going to, if I suddenly seem bright, it's because I want to make sure I quote some of this data, because I think it's really valuable. Like I said, we really want to look at a lot of data and exhibitors that have surveyed and gone to a trade show within the past 12 months, because, much beyond that, it's really not reasonable.
Yeah, I agree.
And, it was interesting to see what sort of stood out to people, and a lot of the fear on the exhibitor side, especially when you get to bigger booths, like, it was cost. I think that's the big thing that, 76% exhibition cost is the biggest challenge in 2023. That jumps to 89% when we looked at over 200 net square feet and higher. So a 20 by 20 and bigger, nearly 90% said, what are we going to do about cost? And that's, I think, is going to ultimately fall on every person in the ecosystem to understand, how do we mitigate cost? How do we explain cost? How do we work with folks like you to say, what's our best way, to manage those costs?
Mm-hmm. So Rich, I think on that one, I want you to keep, putting more of those nuggets out there. But here's what I'll say on that. What you just said is so spot on about it's a matter of the ecosystem all understanding this challenge. Without exhibitors, there's nothing there. Without attendees, there's nothing there, right? So it has to be catered to them, right? That's just the end deal. So for a perfect example, in terms of accountability from my standpoint, we're talking about our crates. We're talking about the way we design and build exhibits. We're talking about the way stuff gets packed and shipped, because we know that right there, we can have an impact and save our client money and reduce that cost inherently, hopefully increasing the value to them at that trade show, right? Now, the associations, I think, have a much more difficult math problem here, which is essentially they need to lower cost and they need to increase value. But you could go through every person in the ecosystem and find a way that they need to make changes, 100%.
And I think if you're not working with partners, that are willing to have that conversation, and I honestly, I started out a lot this year saying, as I was thinking about even our exhibiting this year was, where are the things that are going to stick me later in this year when I think about budgeting, and, I know there's a lot of talk about sustainability. I don't want to go too far down that road yet, but, it's hard too, when you look at, sustainability sometimes takes this back seat when you look at, well, gosh, it's cheaper to toss this booth than it is to, so maybe we should rent, those things, I think is tough for exhibitors. And so, and I would say too, show organizers have the ability to start to have some influence on this, or again, back to your point, at least educate them like, hey, these are where you need to think about costs. It's not, please don't not rent a booth, please don't not, whatever, but there are other important ways to think about those.
Yeah.
So it was funny.
All right, so we have,
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say we have a question, but go ahead, you finish your thought.
Well, I was going to share sort of like the next sort of like one or two more clicks down on, other exhibitors concerned, but we can take a question here.
Let's do a question. This question's from Maria. Maria, thank you for asking a question. I think it's a very good question as well. It says, Rich, what are your thoughts on qualifier questions for lead retrievals? How many questions are ideal? I feel like we have so many questions on that device that we lose our salespeople. So this is an excellent question. I'll let you go first. I have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I find that when you start asking too many questions, salespeople tune out. They don't click it. They don't, they don't collect the good data. And I would say, I mean, this is going to sound like I'm kind of begging out on the answer a little bit, but I think sometimes it's your sales staff. I mean, I think and not that you usually can't set up multiple different types of lead retrieval, but I can know some sales staff that can do that really effectively and some that can't. So the less questions, the better. But I would rather look at as sort of that kind of that journey. Are there ways that aren't necessarily technologically, I mean, lead retrieval is part of that, but also that through the process that you're having that conversation. So less options and then a little more description is most important. And I find that the sales team members that realize that the whole talk to text in a lead retrieval is really an effective way to say, hey, right after that conversation, a couple check boxes and, hey, this was Mary, she wants this, they like this, and then put all that text in there. That's just my take, but Matt, I'm curious to hear yours.
So that's a good one. I love the talk to text. I'm glad you brought that up. So Maria, I think, first you said, what are thoughts on qualifier questions for lead retrievals, right? So I think you need a good lead retrieval system. I don't know how many events you do. There's a good one. I actually did an episode at Exhibitor Live with a company. His name's Ryan. I can't pronounce his last name. He's the CEO of a company called Captello, Captello. They offer a lead capture software. They charge by event, not by number of people in it, which is interesting. And it's really more of a way of organizing these leads. I think you have to have something like that that has the capability to help you have a lead capture strategy, because ultimately what goes in will produce what comes out and the quality on the backside of measuring and creating ROI. In terms of questions, I think the questions should all be dependent on where you want where you're trying to get them to go, right? So qualifiers for me are you trying to figure out as quickly as you can without being rude, is this person an ideal customer for you? Are they the reason that you're there? So I would have probably 3 questions maximum that you are driving home and asking, because if you have 5, 6 questions, it just gets to be too much, right? Like you got to be able to navigate a person fairly quickly. I would say max 3. And I think those questions should really all be based on who the ideal client is, without question.
Or layer in too, buying time frame, because if they're hotter, like I made my strategy post lead list, I would work those quicker. I mean, there could be somebody based on product type that they want, but they're honest and say, look, we're 6-8 months out. At least I've qualified them that they're still in the market, but I can put them, most leads we all know aren't followed up with.
Yes.
So that's,
and I think once you're qualified, Rich, I mean, that's a great point. Once you have somebody qualified, like, okay, this is an ideal person, the note taking, which engagement table they were at, were they at a presentation, were they at a demo, where, like being able to label that inside of a lead capture system, being able to put a voice note, because Maria, I think the key on the backside is personalization, right? When you get done at an event with, you're probably passing leads to a sales team. How can you give them all the ammunition to reach out and say, hey, Dave, you had a conversation with Rebecca at blank show, and like we thought this resource might help you because you were asking a lot of questions around A, B, and C. If you have time in the next week for a conversation, is there anything I can help you with, right? It's not salesy, you're driving value, and you captured personalized information, not just badge scan, throw them into a social media campaign, show them into an email, and throw them to salespeople who are just making calls. And now it becomes not personalized. So I think that's really the beauty of that process that you're asking about there.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that sales team
Very good
training
question.
too. Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll sidebar for a second. One of my favorite activities we do. So we typically have sort of a mini sales kickoff before events, same, training the staff. And I'll tell you a fun activity, and I've showed it to more people, and it was the most highly rated thing we even did at our big sales kickoff this year, was called PowerPoint karaoke. No, you don't have to sing, but for marketers and salespeople, look up PowerPoint karaoke. There's a website you can buy, like the first sort of starter decks. It is fun to get salespeople and marketing people. Basically, you get 10 PowerPoint slides. You have no idea what they are. You have to land on the topic, and you only get 30 seconds a slide. And that to me is what we train to even sometimes do beyond like our booth training, to say like, hey, this is real life. Like, you don't know the questions and you don't know the things are coming. And we judge basically how they deliver on their decks as a way of like, well, welcome to a trade show. You don't know what the questions that may be coming. You may have to get creative. You may not know the answer, but you've got this short window of time to deliver a really good presentation. So sidetrack, but I know a lot of marketing and sales folks always appreciate it. It's our most popular thing that we do when we do kickoffs for events. So
I like that. Okay. Give me the next data point you want to talk about.
Well, it was interesting too when we looked at exhibitors, and obviously engagement was their next biggest concern. Saying, hey, look, half of them were said, beyond cost, the next thing is engagement. How do we connect with attendees? Because again, what are they going to engage on? Should we do our booth differently? Should we give different swag? Like, what does that audience look like? And then, followed by that, was really around decreased attendance. I mean, 37% said we're worried about lower numbers. But what's interesting though, is in the backside of the data, we're finding that that's their concern. Their expectation for show organizers are to continually deliver more and more. Okay, 2022 is great. What are you doing for 2023? What's happening? There's this expectation growing that like, hey, we understood, we're here for the long haul, but what are you doing to keep delivering more and more qualified buyers? Great, you got qualified folks showing up. That's awesome. But we want some more next year. And so I think our kind of COVID pass, our hall pass, is starting to wane smaller and smaller. Yep. And so that's something you have to think about. And exhibitors are going to ask more and more about, qualified buyers and numbers, and it's time to be transparent. I think we all hung our hat on a lot of numbers that, included, the folks working on the loading dock points, but I don't think attendance is always that greatest number now.
Let's hit on a few of these, right? Engagement concern, right? People want to know, hey, I'm going to this trade show. We're spending all this money. We're sponsoring. Now, how do we engage people? Rich, I'd love your thoughts on engaging. My upper level is that you need, number one, meaningful engagement, right? Just wasteful engagement is a waste of time. And then the second thing is you have to fight to stand out and attract attention, right? Like guerrilla marketing style tactics. Those would be my two big things on that. I can go further, but I really want to hear what you think about engagement.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to, I think, when we started thinking about that journey where at points we were activating to activate. It was cool. It was fun. We got badge scans, but did they walk away with something? And that's where we also started looking at back to our, the ICP, who's our buyer and what are they going to enjoy? What are they going to interact with? What are they going to engage with? And I think that's something too that, we're all forgetting that, millennials are suddenly this big buying portion. I mean, I see more, our data showed it that, more and more exhibitors are targeting millennials. If you've forgotten, they're the group we've given a hard time, but guess what? They are now either the most likely in the buying position or soon to be. They're 27 to 42, and there's 72 million of them, and they're coming to trade shows, those younger, audiences. And so even thinking about generationally, and then our buyer to say, hey, what's going to stand out to them? And I like to see, one is, you've got to stand out. Can you engage? Are you solving their challenges? Are you looking at the education at the show and saying, hey, wait a minute, our service or product solves that? How can we align with education? Or, oh, by the way, some of the big data that we're seeing too is that, more younger audiences are coming to engage in person and for education. Can you also offer and connect people educationally in your booth or connect with cool clients? Sometimes I see exhibitors, my favorite activation recently was an exhibitor, their client was Starbucks. Pretty damn cool, and they had the chief technology officer, and one of their salespeople stood out with a paddle that said, come meet the CTO of Starbucks. People were like, yeah, I'd love to meet and ask questions. And they did these sort of mini educational sessions. So things like that stand out because it's just different ways to engage. But I would also say, again, don't just activate to activate. Sometimes simple is better, and hands-on stuff. People want to interact and people want to see behind the scenes. That's another one of my favorite things. Can you show them something what's different than online? Because guess what? We've all done online. What can I touch or see, the five senses in your booth that I just absolutely can't do anywhere else?
I agree with all that. And I also think, really just focus on, you have to find a way to garner attention, right? You have to find a way to stand out. It's a sea of exhibits. It's a sea, how can you attract and stand out? Number one. Two, obviously, once you get people there, you have to have meaningful things for them to do, questions, Q&A, you're qualifying, you got to be ready to go. But I can give one example on that is essentially we ran our podcast in our trade show booth last week. There was lights, cameras, action, a podcast studio we built out. People were coming by and taking pictures, asking questions. What are you guys doing? Who's talking? What's going on? What's happening? It was we garnered attention with having that podcast set up. But then it had the meaningful side to it. We were doing interviews and questioning our ICP about their job, about their story, about their struggles, about where they see industry. What do they need? We were talking to industry vets and people who know what's going on. And so a podcast, if you don't have a podcast, just run a podcast in your booth, run conversations. That's one way, but there's a lot of ways to engage, but you have to fight for it. And
people love to give predictions. I've dressed up as Johnny Cash. We did a cash booth, hugely popular.
Yep.
I've dressed up like Willy Wonka. Some of these things too are not, my wife says sometimes, she's like, when you leave the hotel and you walk across to the convention center, do you ever just wonder sometimes? But that's the kind of things that are memorable, that stand out. And there's a lot of new technology like RFID and IoT wristbands and things that, we did IoT wristbands that lit up. And when it lit up, it meant to come to our booth. And I think our competitors were beyond upset at us. And even the show organizer were a little upset because we may have accidentally set it off during an educational session, and people got up and left the educational session to come to our booth. But
That's funny.
you know,
hey, well, I like that. You got to fight for every inch, right?
And two, you look at like a lot of, younger generations. I mean, again, they want to interact because we've been so digital for so long that these are these opportunities to interact with things, whether our products or services or people. And they want to give it. I mean, I think too, sometimes why not run a focus group? Why not think about product testing in your booth?
Yes.
Because one, guess what? They see your product. Number two, you get feedback. Like, hey, come do a focus group. Okay. Or win a $5 Starbucks gift card. Come do a focus group. And those are the kind of things where people get to interact and touch and feel or give their opinions. And those are some of my other favorite booth activations or consulting time, podcast. It's each person's going to have to figure out what that is. I'll tell you one other, I'm rambling ideas. They're all kind of popping in my head at once, but we saw, this is what they do. They're actually a swag company, but basically it's called the Hat Bar. And hatbar.com, I'm not endorsing them in any way, but I love their activation because so you got to pick your hat and then you got to pick your patch, right? Well, of course I roll up, my title says events and marketing. And so they have to make my hat. I get to put input. Well, all while they're making my hat, I'm sure I got a couple extra presses on that heat thing. They're doing the same thing. They're seeing they could read my badge and they could realize I'm probably a really good target. And we had a conversation during that. It was, if I'd have just come and grabbed a hat, I'd have come and gone. But I got to make my own hat, which I love. And they realized I was a really good contact. And so we had that interaction. So again, they walked away knowing me, I walked away knowing them. And I've talked about their activation in different forums because that time it created, again, I'm convinced they gave me a couple extra heat presses on that hat to spend more time with me, but it didn't feel awkward. And that's I think a big piece of that too.
The Hat Bar is a solid one, right? We mentioned holding a podcast, holding a round table. Love if you can find a local artist and give them a mural, like a big one, like a 20-foot wall that they can paint every single day. So people come back to see it evolve. And maybe it tells a story about your company or the city, or it's connected to a narrative that you're running with. Rich, you know what else I thought was interesting?
The connecting to your narrative. I mean, you did it at Exhibitor Live. I looked at your voting thing. You had an opportunity. People love to give their opinions.
Yes. Well, look, I think story and narrative is everything at a trade show. You have to go with a story, with a narrative that essentially pitches your value proposition, the problem that you solve for people. People don't care about much else. That's what your customers want to know. So then how do you meaningfully engage them? You can't just say, oh, let's do a Jeopardy game in the booth about sports. And you're like, well, you're a chemical company. What are we doing? It doesn't make sense, but you have to try to get creative, tie everything back to a story and a narrative, I think is always the win-win there.
Well, and sometimes being on the pivot, I mean, I will say, look, we ran an activation and by the last day, we decided not to run it because of how the show floor was going to be set up the last day and what was nearest. And so like, it was a hard decision to make, but it was like, look, are we getting the value out of this? And it was a hard one to make, but we were like, you know what? It's not worth the expense to run this the last day. And so I think we get also bought in on these concepts. I mean, again, you're talking to the guy that dresses up like Willy Wonka or Johnny Cash or whoever, sometimes the person in the booth is this guy, but we all have to be willing to sometimes pivot or think about those activations or adjust at the end of the day and say, what worked to this? Or like, like our cash booth, we didn't plan to run it as much as we did, but as every crowd got bigger and bigger and I'm hyping people up and I'm doing all this stuff, it was like the gateway drug, like, give me one more hit. And we ran it more. Different event, we cut last day out.
Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? I mean, that's a good one. On the millennial piece, I do think it's interesting. They are the buyers right now, and they're going to be the buyers for the next 10 years. Gen Z is going to start to turn into buyers, and that's going to shift here. My essential thought is that millennials, when you get them out of the house to go do something, you better give them an experience. They don't want to be out of the house or out of their ecosystem for something they could do on their phone or in a computer. So I just want your thoughts on the millennials. I think a lot of people here who are event marketers, running events, running programs, not that they have to cater what they're doing to millennials, but I think they have to start to understand that in the next 10 years, their buyer already is or will become millennials.
Yeah, it's sometimes hard for sales team I mean, I see it, is like there's this assumption that based on dress or look or age, well, that's not a buyer. Yeah, I bet you. And so sometimes when we go through training, it's like, look, this is a millennial, and this is what, sometimes again, it's like knowing what's in the wild out in those aisles and trying to say, hey,
Yeah.
but you're right. I think it's a challenge now to say, look, they've already digitally connected. I mean, they have everything on their phones. This is, what's going to be different in your booth because they probably already know you and what are those things that they're going to do. And so, I think when you also look at making those connections, we did a lot of research too around, what were the things why they were going to events. It's education, it's networking, it's in-person experiences. And so again, can you tie some of those things back to, guess what, you may be new. I see a lot of folks, I mean, I love when we just not a particular generation, I'll sidestep for a second, but we often target on the association management side of our business what we call like the small staff association, like, and say,
Okay.
look, and so we do things just for them. And so when you look at like even generational targeting, like, they want to connect with other people and other people in the industry. And so oftentimes, if you can be that glue or present events at places they like, or say, targeting and say, hey, look, we are the company, and we're going to help also connect you with our products and services and other people in the industry. And that's a real hard to think about, like, how does our booth and how does everything we do land with this audience? And I used to joke about this, but, sometimes we have to sort of market test this and see, like, I mean, again, like I went into Johnny Cash. I mean, there's a lot of people that have no idea who Johnny Cash is, so you start to think about like, how do you sort of market test some of these concepts to see, like, does this land, or can we do things within our activation that serves this market?
Yeah. Any more interesting data from your guys' findings from polling people? Anything else worthwhile discussing?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see. There is again that generational shift. Millennials are the target. There's next. But depending on the product or service, still is, if depending on price point and service, like you can't ignore an audience, but making sure that you're also, targeting it. I think from the exhibitor side, our job is to push events, associations to say, what is the makeup of, who's coming to events? What are you also doing? Because,
100%.
we can't simply pull off drawing in that population. It's also on the association. And I think associations are starting to realize, like, hey, a lot of our members are aging out. How do we attract this? And we joked again in the green room, but there are people now, and there's younger generations who have a very different perspective of what events serve. And especially as we look at this remote workforce, an event may be the water cooler. An event may be the time, but like you said,
Yes.
getting them off the couch, getting them to put on pants and shoes and get on a plane, and hearing, oh my God, flights are expensive and it's hard to get there. You got to give them a reason. Some of that's going to be on everybody to draw them, not just the show organizers, but us exhibitors.
I think the data is an interesting piece, Rich, when it comes to associations, right? Because they obviously are orchestrating their third party. They are organizing a group of people. It's essentially what they do. Obviously, they drive more value than that, but that's one of the main things they do. And it is a call, like your guys' research shows me that. The exhibitor advocate, with Jessica Sabilla, their research shows me that. CEIR, everybody's research shows that exhibitors are worried. They want to know the data from associations. Associations are going to hold that data because it's theirs, probably in a protective way to say, hey, we can't just have you spam every single person here. We can't, this can't be a free for all. But there's got to be a middle ground here, meaning what you just said makes a ton of sense to me. Associations, well, exhibitors need to be able to go to the association and say, tell me why I need to go to this show. And they should be able to come back and say, well, your ICP is this. Here's the attendee list. Here's the companies. Here's the sizes. Here's what we have. You make the call. rather than saying, well, in years past, attendance looks, stop telling me about attendance. Stop giving me general numbers about attendance. I don't care, because I know you're lumping it all together. I know you're going to include exhibitors and the badges that they got, and, the garbage guy who gets a badge for his buddy. Like, it's just, don't tell me that. Give me the data. Don't give me everybody's contact information. Sure, I get that, because it'll be a spam marketing mess, but they got to start to circulate that data to people to prove the worth and the value of the show.
Well, and start pushing. I think it's on show organizers to make sure that, again, we blur those lines of education, because when I look at the data, I mean, honestly, the number one reason why millennials, actively engage in association is networking. No, sorry, career skills and certifications. Right behind it is 51% with networking in person. So there again, they're there to get education. Whether they do it for you or you say, hey, if you went to this session, you should come see our product or service. Hey, they should give show floor tours. And you all, I mean, most every exhibitor that I talk about, they are often the experts, because they see it across multiple clients or things like that. I mean, again, you guys see every type, but sometimes we tend to disqualify them from speaking because, they'll give a pitch. No, most exhibitors, if they're good, they're going to show you everything that's going on. And so that's where, if you can either push on show organizers or create it yourself, say if these are your challenges, come to our booth, because we can solve them for you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point, what you just made there. Like, the best exhibitors are not salesy. They're not grabbing you off the aisle and hounding you and knocking you down. They've put an experience together. They've put together engagement, and they want their ideal person that may be interested to come in and have a either discussion or engagement or raffle. I mean, we gave a bunch of really cool giveaways that went with our theme. Like, when done right, it's really done. It's done well, for sure.
Well, and it's funny too, because you look at the last couple things that's really high for this generation is networking digitally and in communities and in person, and socializing by common interests. And that's what events really do well. But we tend to just do it for 2 or 3 days. And so whether the association does it, or you can think about exhibitors, again, networking, like, how can we connect them with, I mean, one of the things that I love too is when I try to get our clients to badge swap once in a while. Say, like, hey, go to IAPA. You want to see a theme park show that you don't compete against, and how they put zip lines and like, it's the coolest show ever. It will get you out of your headspace, because you don't exhibit at a theme park show, because you're a medical show. And sometimes getting ourselves out of those spaces and creating that networking and connections. So again, how can your exhibit space or what you do and connect them digitally? Because I think, again, to me, it's digital connections. In-person events will drive us there. That's where we connect and see each other in real life. And then how can we connect them afterwards? And that's also too, like, how can we give them education or things that these people we meet in our booth year round? Because they certainly came by. Can we give them more educational content or podcasts like this to say, look, we're with you throughout the year. That's what we do really well. And that's, what I think is the success of the podcast like this, is you're saying, look, our client, look, I'm here to keep you apprised of what's happening in the industry.
We want to keep this conversation going all the time. We want to learn. We want to engage. We want to deliver people that know things. Yeah, I mean, 100%. Rich, let's talk about sustainability in events. It's been a big thing. It was a big part of my conversation at Exhibitor with CTSM folks and even event marketers that are not in the CTSM program that went. Sustainability came up over and over again. I think whether some companies are just pure virtue signaling or some companies really genuinely mean it, it's going to be a topic that gets pushed. What are you seeing? Any advice, ideas, thoughts, anything?
Yeah, sustainability is event risk. I mean, it's also an asset. I think more companies are evaluating their overall carbon footprint. And that's where, though, I think changing the narrative of saying, look, what events deliver on is there a carbon footprint from event? Absolutely. But if you compare that to sending our teams all over the country, flight after flight, day after day, when a lot of those are cut, or at least condensed into an event, hey, we actually are reducing our carbon footprint. I tend to believe we're not that far off from companies eventually saying, look, we're going to look at our total carbon footprint and to make business decisions to say, look, we can't do all these things. So we have to make sure that we're presenting an event as a reduction or consolidation. also as exhibitors, we got to think about, hey, are we visiting? Like, we flew all this way to DC to this convention. We have 30 clients in DC. Did we visit any of them if they weren't already at the convention?
Yeah.
Did we add an
That's
event, a user group or customer briefing, or do we add something while our team was already there? Can we piggyback these things? Because that drives the sustainability concept of saying like, hey, we've got to maximize, we got to be cognizant of it. Can you do those things? But it goes back to education. I don't think, even in our survey, a lot of we had an open-ended box around sustainability, and most of the exhibitors were like, we just don't even know where to start. So back to our ecosystem, like we're going to have to ask our partners, like, what does it mean? Tell me if I pick this versus that, or buy this versus that, or rent or that. Like, I think we're going to rely on the ecosystem to help guide us, because I don't think most exhibitors know even where to start. So that's where I say it starts with education, and if we can ask all our ecosystem, like if each one of us does one thing with each one of our partners and they say, well, don't do this, do this, skip that versus this, I think we get somewhere.
Yeah. We have had a couple clients ask us to put together documentation for them, right? Essentially from our side of things, custom rental exhibits or turnkey rental solutions, whatever you want to call them. They are as sustainable from a booth building standpoint, short of building an exhibit from like recyclables and, reclaimed wood, right? It just is, because you're basically saying that 70% of the structure of this exhibit is built by a framing system that will be used for 10 years.
Yeah.
So you're not having to build the panel. You're not having, different things like that. So that's a simple place that I would suggest people start examining your program. Rentals do so many good things. I don't want to get on a rental tangent, but they basically allow you flexibility. They allow you to change sizes. They allow you to test themes. They allow you to product launch. They allow you to test messaging. They are more sustainable. I could go on and on forever. That would be one. Two is I would be talking to companies like mine, whoever you're working with, and say, hey, what does the shipping look like? How can we reduce the crates? How can we reduce the impact of freight? Because freight obviously has, if you're going to send a booth in 3 trailer loads, your carbon footprint's not great on that show. You know what I mean? So are they building crates properly? Are they getting creative with the sizes of them? Are they built so they can, either sit side by side in the back of trailers? Are they getting the maximum amount in those crates? And are you designing the booth as modularly as you can so that you're not sending big bulk, massive pieces? Those are just basic questions that you can start asking.
Oh, and it's funny too, because I think there's just misperception, and that's where that education piece comes in, where, and a lot of times show organizers, I think they don't know themselves. Honestly, I'm on the, I teach in the CEM program. In our last CEM faculty meetup, we were talking about, do we need a course on sustainability? Because all of us in the room, these are people that teach how to market. I teach marketing, I teach sales. We teach people how to be good in this industry. And we're like, well, we don't have a sustainability course. And we're like, how do we do it? Do we build that into every one of our courses? Because you also see too, this is where younger generations, they'll start raising their hand and asking the question a lot quicker. And when you're sort of flat-footed going, that's what they're going to start to make those value judgments on.
Yeah. I think it goes back to the suppliers that are being worked with. How sustainable are those suppliers, whether they're printers, custom builders, you know what I mean? All those different areas. It's obviously multi-layered, but I do think what you said initially is that everybody has to kind of play their part in it and, really do what they can. Other than that, I don't really have a better answer on it at this point in time.
Yeah, I think we just have to start asking questions, and it's going to be slow. I think, unfortunately, there are economic factors that sometimes make sustainability more expensive. And in a recovery industry, it's hard to spend any extra costs when we're just recovering.
Great. All right, everybody, we are coming up on the hour here. I do always like to be mindful of people's time. Obviously flattered and glad that people stay on. It's amazing. So Rich, what I would love to hear from you is any kind of anything opportunistic that you see moving forward in events that you may want to relay to exhibitors, event marketers, anything where you think they can be opportunistic, what they should leverage, what they should be using at their disposal.
Yeah, what I look at seems to be, there is an understanding that we lost in-person events during COVID, and we all tried the virtual world in various different forms and formats. And what we've realized is there's still no better thing than human connection. And trade shows and events, curate and bring together, to me, commerce, the buyers and suppliers, connections, which we all do so much better in person at, community. How are we harnessing that community, and really content? And so, when you look at those sort of 4 C's, I think for exhibitors, again, are you delivering? Can you deliver on those? Can you look at your ecosystem? And there is a desire to get back in person. And that's the exciting part. There are people willing to buy, but it is going to be on the show managers and associations to keep engaging and thinking beyond just those 2 or 3 days. I mean, again, we're all guilty of, there's a pre-show email and we're going to build a booth, and then we're going to pack that booth up and send it off somewhere, and then we're on to a new event. And I think it's on us to tell people, like, hey, it's a different world. It's an exciting time. You've got to build engagement. You've got to understand your ICP, who's your audience, what are they going to engage with? And I will say, I know some people ask me, and you may agree or disagree, I think the metaverse, there are a lot of people saying that's the next thing in events business. I would completely disagree. I'm more open if someone says they aren't. We sucked at virtual. I don't know how we're going to build it again, this trade show space in a metaverse. So focus your effort back on, building those connections, making sure that when you are in person, you are completely engaged. And again, stop thinking that lead scans is it, looking at all those data, because we're going to have to present. Trade shows deliver multiple sets of values. Yes, new prospects and leads. Absolutely. Everybody wants them. But holy smokes, look how many clients we engaged with and their total value that we would have not seen them. And my final thought on this is going to sound anti-event or like not make any sense to people. I think events are now the one distraction-free space. What does that really mean is if you talk to your sales and your account managers and a lot of people out there, they can't get folks on the phone anymore. They're busy. They're not at home. They're not in the office. It's a much more distracted time. And sometimes the first time that you're going to get a meaningful conversation in your booth over a drink, whatever it may be, is at a show. And if you're not prepped to realize, wow, this is my chance to do that, and it's been so hard on the phone, and we've worked hard to engage them, it's happened in events. And that's what excites me. Like, we're not connecting sometimes in these spaces. We're seeing them at events, and that's the time we actually have a really meaningful conversation, and you got to be ready for it.
When you talk about human connection, community, content, these live events, right? So it kind of doubles up on what I'm thinking about when you said about the metaverse, right? Which is, I think, like the metaverse, virtual, at least in my lifetime, I don't really see replacing live events. What I do see is both of them driving different value, right? And I think, Rich, to your point, on the live event side, if you were an event marketer, if you need to be creating connection, community, you need to be creating content at your events as well. You need to create it for a 365, days a year, utilizing it from that. You have to leverage, you have to leverage meaningful, like interpersonal connection at these events, because you can't get it in the metaverse, right? Yeah. You could do some really cool shit in metaverse, but you can't get that. You just cannot, right? So they're going to, metaverse will have its thing. It will be a sales and marketing tool, be a connectivity tool to a degree, but they'll do their own things. And, Rich, to your last point, like us being at a trade show recently, I mean, I got to watch, 3 members of my team that were at the booth with me. I was busy basically talking like a monkey in a cage for 3 days, just podcast after podcast, but I was able to watch them and just not stuck on their laptops, not stuck on their phones, for 5-6 hours a day, locked in, talking to people, smiling, having conversation, engaging. I think you're right. It's one of the last frontiers per se, where people do get that connection, that networking, those conversations. They can put the tablets, the phones, the computers, the email, the constant suck that is technology away. Yeah.
I mean, people multitask during Zoom. I'm guilty of it. And I'm not necessarily, again, I think it's that, we should engage as event marketers digitally to drive them to the in-person, because that's when we get to finally connect all those pieces. I've read your blog post. I've listened to your podcast. I've, read your emails. Holy smokes, there you are in person. that is I don't know, that again, that gets me excited. And I think, again, we're trying to separate digital and in person, and to me they live together. And as event marketers, we have to figure out how to connect them all.
Yeah, I think event marketers, with what Rich is saying, double down on the connection, on the meaningful interpersonal networking conversations, and double down on being in person, right? Because people do crave it. They do want it. Rich,
It's exhausting being back in person, though. I think it's really hard to be back in person, to be on and engaged. You can't turn off your camera in person.
Mm-hmm. It is tiring. I was exhausted after Louisville, but we were there for like 5 days. I was pretty tired. Yeah. Had nothing to do with the evening activities. It was just those
tend to, yeah. Expo was in Louisville this year, and that tended. And I'm like you, I host the news and views stage at Expo, and so I'm interviewing people, and so I'm seeing tangentially what's happening in the booth. But again, I think it's funny when you see people like, I'm exhausted. I'm like, yeah, because you've been on. You didn't get to tune out. You didn't, and pants and shoes are tough nowadays. I don't wear them anymore.
Well, hopefully you're wearing them at your events.
I like there. Phil just said something there.
Phil said, totally agree. The metaverse should be in addition to, not in lieu of, live events. You just can't replace that human connection. But agreed, it helps you stay connected after the event ends. Yeah. I mean, look, people tried to like blend these things together, Phil. Like people try, and to no fault of their own. No one knew what to do when COVID happened. And frankly, I'm so sick of talking about it. But essentially, like, no one knew what to do. Everybody was scrambling, trying to do something. But essentially, look, anything virtual, metaverse, anything in that space, it's going to be used as a sales and marketing tool, as is live events. They're sales and marketing tools when it comes to B2B, right? But they're going to run different avenues, different lanes, and drive different value, and they will work parallel together. A good event marketer will run them parallel, driving different message, different value, and different experiences in those lanes, and try to drive results from both avenues, without a doubt.
Well, and that's hard too when you look at social media, because a lot of people ask me, should we be on TikTok? Should we be on Instagram? I'm like, well, who's your audience? Because my answer may be completely different as a marketer, depending on where your audience is. We've got clients that are doing those things, and clients that it just makes zero sense because their audience would never connect with them on TikTok or know what TikTok even is. So
what is advice to your younger self?
Other than buy certain stocks before March of 2020 and sell them at the end of 2020?
Yes, other than your hindsight financial advice, yes.
It's funny. I look back and because I've been in this business a long time, and what I've realized that I would tell my younger self is sometimes we get attached to the events we serve or the events we work on or the companies we work at. And in the end, a lot of it really is your personal brand that gets you, what we think is a really big world. And when you start to slice and dice whatever industry we're in, it really is small. So I would tell my younger self to focus again. It sounds kind of egotistical, but like realizing that, because I at moments attached myself very heavily to the event. And when that time came and gone, I felt like my life had changed. I'm like, oh, I'm not working on that event anymore. And I realized like I would teach myself it's more about the personal me, the personal brand, and what I do in events, and not so much the event or that company or whatever. So I tell younger self to focus on making sure your personal brand is about events, not the event you may work on. So
good stuff. Rich, thank you for coming on this show and talking to us a little bit about trade shows and events. I know Ish just put your LinkedIn, your company website, everything in there. Where can people find you? Where can they interact with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best. It's probably where I purvey what's really going on. I push out stuff. I do have I'm asked more and more people ask me about like speaking of different things. And so I wrote my own website, which is the most weird moment of my life. But richvallaster.com or tradeshowwonk.com has like how to connect also with me or where I'm quoted or stuff like that. So yeah, that was a weird moment, but LinkedIn's probably the best bet. I'm not a self-promoter, but again.
Yes. Oh, I asked. It's okay. I asked. Nice, Rich. Sure. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for chatting. Appreciate it. And everybody who showed up, greatly appreciate you. Hope you're getting value from the show. If you have any feedback, if you need anything from us, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can email me at Matt, M-A-T-T, at rockwayexhibits.com. Any feedback on the show, guest suggestions, topic suggestions, if there's things out there that you want to know, that you want us to dive into that we're not talking about, would love to hear them. And thank you again, Rich. Thank you. Thank you for everybody who showed up. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.